Hi, welcome to the recap of the first lesson of the advanced course, which itself was a recap of all the lessons of the beginner's course. Here in this lesson, we will go over all the important elements that we learned in the beginner's course. Most of the things, if you've taken the beginner's course, then you might notice that not everything that is done in the beginner's course will be in this lecture or this recap, because they will be repeated when we treat them in the appropriate lecture of the advanced course. For example, if you did the course last year, in the 9th lesson we went over basic sentence structure. I will not repeat that because the next lesson, we'll also do a recap of, treats sentence structure in much more detail, so it won't be necessary. Furthermore, I already made a separate recap of the first and second lesson of the beginner's course that you can also find here. The first lesson dealt with pronunciation, and the second lesson dealt with the conjugations of to have and to be, and with numbers. So if you're interested in recapping that, please check that out. I do not have the time to recap that again, or the energy. This is already the third time I'm recording this, because the first two times the audio cut off. Fun times. But this makes it go quicker for me, and those topics are explained in much more depth there. So please check them out if you want. If not, then whatever. I would recommend looking at the pronunciation lesson, because it's always good to check up on your pronunciation, I think. And if you don't, then that's also good, but please check out the beginner's course manual, maybe, if you want. The beginner's course booklet of this year is very different. It has a lot of self-contained grammar summaries of all the topics, all the grammar topics that are treated and all the pronunciation. And specifically, Appendix B of the beginner's course manual goes into a lot of depth about the pronunciation of Dutch. The beginner's course manual can also be found in your menu in the Files tab here. So please check that out if you're interested. It is, I think, a good resource. Also, in the advanced course, I try to speak a bit more Dutch, but for this recap, I will definitely be doing it in English because it's quicker and easier for you to understand. All right, having said that, let's go on to the third lesson. We started with conjugating the verb gaan. Gaan means to go. The conjugations are ik ga, jij gaat, hij, zij, het gaat, wij gaan, jullie gaan, zij gaan. What makes gaan an interesting verb is that you always use it with an adverb of, or you almost always use it with an adverb of place, namely naar de supermarkt, for instance. It will be useful in the next lesson where we talk about adverb placement. Wij gaan naar de supermarkt, meaning we go to the supermarket. In principle, not very interesting isolated, but gaan is also used in conjunction with an infinitive to be the future tense. But this will be explained in the fourth lesson of the advanced course, which is viewable, which you will be attending, hopefully. And hopefully you see this before that. Furthermore, I needed to mention a recap of the third lesson is not available, but there's a recording of the whole third lesson. So please check that out. It's not as condensed as this one, but again, I don't have the time to make a new one. All right. The most important thing that we learned in the beginner's course in the third lesson is the conjugation of the regular verbs in this present tense. How to do this, we first need to find the stem, or the stam in Dutch, of the verb. And for ik, the first person singular, it is just the stem. For you, it is the stem plus t. And for he, she, it's also the stem plus t. And for we, it is simply the infinitive. I also put a recap of the third lesson of the beginner's course in, it's not a recap, it's just the third lesson in the drive, in the file tab, because I go into a lot more depth here, especially about the spelling rules for this. I just hope that you remember that a bit. To recap, I don't have the slides for that here, unfortunately. Oh wait, I do have the slides. I can show you that slide here. I don't have it in front of me, but wow, it is here. Wow. Technology, you know? The power of editing. What we do is we first have the infinitive, and we chop off the en. What we are left with is called the crude stem. It's called the crude stem because it's not always a stem, and the stem that you insert in this nice formula. How to go from the stem to the crude stem is to apply one or more of the following rules. You have to apply at most two. The first one is chop off en. We need to, if we have more than one syllable consonant at the end, get rid of it, because they don't add anything to pronunciation. So, for example, the verb stemmen, we chop off en, and then you have stem with two m's left, which is then the crude stem. To make the stem of stemmen, we chop off the m at the end, and we get stem, stem. And then we just, it is ik stem, jij stemt, hij het stemt, wij stemmen, etc. Easy. The second rule is to preserve the long vowel sound. For example, in the verb lopen, which means to walk, we have a long tense vowel sound, o. If we chop off en, however, we get the word lop, which is pronounced differently, o, loop, lop. To ameliorate this, we insert another o, and we return to the original sound, which is loop. And it becomes ik loop, jij loopt, hij, zij, het loopt. Loopt. Great. Wij lopen, etc., etc. The third rule is that if the crude stem ends on a Z or V, we get rid of we transform it into an S or an F. That is because in Dutch we don't like voiced consonants at the end of words or in front of a T. Basically, this is sort of the rule. Why that is, I'm not really sure. It's just how the Dutch language functions. So, for example, the verb reizen, you chop off en, and you get reis as the crude stem. However, we don't want the z at the end of a word, so it becomes reis. The same happens with durven, which ends on a v, the crude stem, and we change that v into an f to create a real stem, which is durf. This is basically, those are also basic Dutch spelling rules, and we will return to those a lot more. For example, when dealing with plurals, which is the next lesson. In lesson 4, we treated plurals. Making plurals in Dutch is, in principle, pretty simple. In practice, somewhat difficult because there are a lot of cases. You almost always add either an S, an apostrophe S, or an EN. Most words take EN, approximately 70% of the words. Don't quote me on the number, it might be wrong. But most words take EN. So if you don't know, just slap EN to the end of the word. But, as you see at the bottom here, please take into account the Dutch spelling rules. So, we see here pepernoot, which is Dutch candy, often eaten during Sinterklaas or before, becomes pepernoten. We don't write pepernoten with two O's because that is excessive. O-T-E, the O is always pronounced as the tense version. Again, see the recap of lesson 1 for more explanation of this. And mes, knife, becomes messen with two S's. We need to preserve the vowel sound of and we do this by having two S's after the E. If we only had one E, it would be pronounced mason, because then it would be tense. If we have vowel, consonant, vowel, then the first vowel is pronounced tense. And we don't want that, because if we have vowel, consonant, word, end, it's pronounced lax, like mess. So that's why we add another S for messen. Alright, so the other easy case is the last one from the bottom, namely adding an apostrophe s. And you do this if the word ends on A, I, O, U, or Y, basically. So here's the word menu. Then the plural is menus. Or in Dutch, als je doet dus menu, becomes menus. And baby becomes babies. This looks kind of weird because Dutch English loanwords that end on a Y don't become their English plural with IES, but they're made Dutch, so we treat them like Dutch words, and so do apostrophe S. This apostrophe S basically implies that there should be another vowel here, which makes the sound longer. So if we didn't have this apostrophe S, it would say, for example, menus would be M-E-N-U-S, and a Dutch person would pronounce this as menus. And this apostrophe S reminds us, oh, this should be long. I hear you ask, why don't you just write two U's like you normally do? I do not know. I think that would be made more sense, but someone decided at some point that is not pretty, and therefore we have this. It works just as well. You just need to remember it. For the other cases, you just add an S to the end, and these there's actually quite a lot of cases, but these are the most common ones. If the word ends just on an E, you add an S. Bonnetje becomes bonnetjes. Salade becomes salades. Pretty simple. Technically, there's an exception to this. If the word refers to a person, for example, werkende, which means working person, you don't add an S, but you add an N. So it doesn't become werkendes, but werkenden. Now, most words that end on an E are not referring to people, so in general you can remember, okay, just do an S. If words end on unemphasized ending EL, EM, EN, ER, or ERD, you also add an S. Tafel, tafels, keuken, keukens. And lastly, foreign words that end on that in the original language take an S as a plural, also take a plural in Dutch with an S. So credit card becomes also credit cards in English, in Dutch. This is the Dutch pronunciation of this word, croissant. Yeah, sorry, French people. Becomes croissants. Other examples are tram, TV, speaker, you know, just any. Most Dutch loanwords are English or French, and those usually take an S. So the also take S in Dutch. All right, that's about plurals. In the fifth lesson of the, I don't know, there's already two courses ago that we did this in the fifth lesson, but this is a good place to talk about it. I don't want to talk about the jij distinction, because that's in the second lesson now, so please check that out. But the het distinction in Dutch is pretty important. So Dutch has two definite articles. A definite article implies that the noun it is placed in front of is kind of unique. So it's just the equivalent of the. So you have the table or a table. And de and het both mean the. De is not, it's not like in French, for example, that de is masculine and het is feminine. In fact, there used to be three definite articles, but the two of them have coalesced into de. So de is now a masculine slash gender, masculine slash feminine article, and het is a neutral article, or the gendered and ungendered article, whatever. In the Netherlands, people don't really think of them per se as being gendered. They're just two words, similar to, for example, in Swedish, where you have en and et words. People don't really think of those as gendered. In the Netherlands, people also don't really think of de and het as having a gender. That's not per se a concern. And de and het also don't, there are no hard and fast rules for determining whether a word is de or het. So a book, for example, an inanimate object, is het, but a lamp, also an inanimate object, is de. De lamp, het boek. There are not really rules for this. Here are a few you can use. This is definitely not exhaustive, but these are the ones that are definitely the case. The other ones you just have to learn. One thing that might help you is that most words are de, so if in doubt, guess de. Otherwise, I will recommend this always. No one ever takes me up on this, I think. There's a De Het app in the Play/App Store where you can just, as flashcards, remember whether it's De or Het. The one tip I will give you is if I teach you a word, please write down whether it's De or Het. It will save you a lot of trouble in the long run. I will try to always give you a word with De or Het as well. So, moving on, there are three cases when a word is definitely het. Namely, if it is a diminutive, of een klein woord. Het drankje. Het is de drank, het drankje. Words that end on namely like het museum. Or words that end on isme. Het kapitalisme. Those are always het. Words that are always de are words that are plurals. So, de drankjes. Words that refer to persons. De bakker. Or if you refer to numbers or letters, which is not very common. But if you want to say, point to a 7 on the wall, says, oh yeah, de 7 looks very nice, for example, you always use de. Again, this doesn't come up that often, but hey, it's just a few things you don't have to remember. All right. Moving on. The 6th lesson dealt with telling time in Dutch. Telling time in Dutch is somewhat complicated, but basically we'll just quickly go through it. In Dutch, the first, usually tell time, you first ask. So to say what time is it, you say hoe laat is het? Let's see if I have a slide for that. Yes, hoe laat is het? What time is it? How late is it? And to answer, you say het is, it is, and then something like this. If the big handle is 12, you just say the number and then uur. So it is now late, so approximately 11 uur, 11 o'clock. If it is 5 past, you say 5 over 11. 10 past, you say 10 over 11. Quarter past, you say kwart over 11. And then you would expect 20 past, 20 over 11. And then you would be wrong, because that is not really the common way to say it. It's not per se incorrect, it's definitely intelligible, but mostly people would say het is 10 voor half 12. So if it's 10:20, you would say 10 voor half 12, literally translating to 10 to half to 12. Sounds very cumbersome, right? It is, kind of. But it is technically correct, people, and this is how things are said in the Netherlands. In the north, it's sometimes more common to say 20 over, but that's definitely not the standard. So I would recommend you saying this, that is 10 voor half 12, over 20 over 12. 20 over 11, I'm sorry. The same goes for 5 voor, so you say 5 voor half 11, 5 voor half 12 if it is 11:25. And you say half 12 if it is 11:30. So this is kind of different from, for example, British English, where if you would say it's half 11, it would mean it's half past 11. I'm pretty sure if that's wrong, just ignore that I said that. But if you say it is half 12, you mean it is half 12. 11:35 works the same. It is 5 over half 12. 11:40, same. 10 over half 12, and then at 11:45 things start to get normal again, and you say het is kwart voor 12, 10 voor 12, and 5 voor 12, and then you say 12 uur again. So that is how you tell time. Here are some examples. Hoe laat is het? Well, the first one, okay, the big handle is on the 12, the small is on the 10, so it is 10 uur. The second one, the big handle is on the 11, the small handle is on the 4, so it is 5 voor 4, or it's almost on the 4. And the last one, the big handle is on the 8, the small handle is near the 12, so it is 11:40, and in Dutch you would say it is 12:10, 10 past half to 12. Yes, so that's it. That's all there is to it. Take some practicing, but I'm sure you'll figure it out. Other good things to know are the days of the week. I will just very quickly go through this. The days of the week are maandag, dinsdag, woensdag, donderdag, vrijdag, zaterdag en zondag. The whole week is called de week. This is marked wrong here. It should be door de week are the weekdays, and the weekend is called het weekend. Yes, I will ignore that second part there. Next. In lesson 7, we treated the past tense and the past simple, basically. The lesson that you will be attending deals with the present perfect, a more common version that is used in Dutch. But it's good to quickly go over this, because we will also quickly go over it again in lesson 4 or 14. So how you construct the past simple is to take the stem. We learned how to make this still. And you add de or te. For example here, hij werkte gisteren achter de bar. Wij kenden dat woord nog niet. He worked yesterday behind the bar, literally. We didn't know that word yet. So when do you add de or te? To do this, you check whether this is important, whether the crude stem, so just the infinitive minus en, ends on a consonant that is in sexy soft ketchup. So an example that we saw in the last slide was werken. The crude stem of werken is werk. Dus with a K, this ends on sexy soft ketchup. One of these K is in sexy soft ketchup. So you add te. So the past simple would be ik werkte, jij werkte, hij werkte, wij werkten, jullie werkten, zij werkten. If it is not in sexy soft ketchup, you add de for the singular and den for the plural. The reason for this is that this makes the consonants in sexy soft ketchup are unvoiced consonants. Unvoiced consonants are consonants where you don't vibrate your voice box to pronounce them. The easiest way to see this is the difference between S, S, and Z. Z, Z, S, Z. With Z, you vibrate your voice box, and with S, you do not. And so T and D are basically the same sound, but T is unvoiced, you don't vibrate your voice box, t, t. But D, you do, d, d. And in this way, theoretically, you get a consonant clusters of unvoiced consonants or voiced consonants, and this is easier to pronounce. So you get werkte instead of werkde. You notice that it's kind of harder to pronounce for me. However, in practice, this does not always happen. For example, the verb reizen, if you chop off en, again, you need to take the crude stem here. The crude stem ends on a Z, and that is not in sexy soft ketchup. However, to construct the present simple, you need to take the stem, not the crude stem, and then add de or ten, depending on whether the last letter of the crude stem is in sexy soft ketchup. So Z is not in sexy soft ketchup, so we add den, but the stem of reizen is reis with an S. So now the past simple of reizen is reisde, which kind of defeats the point of the rule. So we get a unvoiced consonant S and then a voiced consonant D, reisde. This is, I think, a very stupid rule in Dutch. and this would be ameliorated if we simply looked at the stem for when to add T or D, but we don't. Fortunately, it's not a lot of cases that this happens. Unfortunately, the reason why this doesn't happen that much is because a lot of words in Dutch are onregelmatig, irregular in the present simple, in the past simple. I mean, present simple are almost all regular. Here are some examples: hebben, zijn, gaan, drinken, lopen, eten. A lot of common verbs are irregular in the past simple, and there are some rules for how to spot them and to construct them, but those are kind of complicated. I would recommend going to dutchgrammar.com to look at the word list there. I will also send you that in the lesson 14. A good rule of thumb is that if a verb is irregular in English in the past simple, it is also irregular in Dutch. So eating, drinking, buying, all these are irregular in English and also in Dutch. Doesn't work with everything. Lopen, for example, is irregular in Dutch, but walking is not irregular in English. But it has about a 70-80% success rate, so it's a good rule of thumb. Again, this doesn't teach you what the irregular form is, but you can look that up. You just need to kind of grind those out at a certain point. Just like when you learned English, probably. At least I had to do that in high school. Just memorize rows of fucking irregular verbs, which sucks. I don't wish that upon you. I think that is the fastest way to learn them. Otherwise, you just need to have a lot of exposure. But that is how the past tense works. Again, we will go through that a bit in the next lesson. I will skip this. And I will skip this as well, because it's not very important. Those are just words, and the ninth lesson is about word order, but that is what the next recap lesson is about. So, I hope this was a bit useful as a refresher. If not, I can also understand that. I hope to see you in class, and see you in the next recap of lesson 2, which is a bit more important. We deal with syntax. Very fun.